On the 15th day of December in 1944, temperatures plummeted to a bone-chilling 12 degrees Fahrenheit. Within the confines of an improvised detention facility positioned just beyond the boundaries of Munich, countless German female captives trembled violently inside their worn-out garments, exhaling visible vapor into the glacial atmosphere. An extraordinary occurrence was about to unfold that would fundamentally transform their preconceived notions regarding the American forces who held them prisoner. The subsequent events would not merely preserve human existence, but would thoroughly demolish the entrenched beliefs that both adversaries harbored about one another. In moments like these, when history reveals its most unexpected acts of humanity, you can subscribe to WW2 Hidden Archives to explore stories that uncover the unseen sides of war. These incarcerated women could never have anticipated that the very individuals they dreaded most would ultimately emerge as their unexpected rescuers, demonstrating compassion when cruelty seemed inevitable. The detention compound represented nothing beyond hurriedly constructed wire barriers encircling an assemblage of timber structures that permitted frigid air to penetrate through countless openings and fissures. Throughout their construction, initially conceived to accommodate male combatants taken during warfare, this establishment underwent rapid transformation when forces from America commenced apprehending substantial quantities of German females who had performed diverse functions supporting the Reich's military apparatus. These detained individuals were far from ordinary citizens inadvertently ensnared within combat zones. Numerous individuals had served as medical personnel attending wounded soldiers in battlefield hospitals, telecommunications specialists operating wireless communication devices, and administrative workers maintaining logistical operations that sustained German military endeavors from behind operational lines. The females arrived at this confinement location wearing whatever garments they possessed during their capture moments. Several still displayed fragments of their official uniforms, now damaged and discolored following extended periods of transportation and administrative processing through multiple detention locations. Additional captives had been extracted from residential dwellings and wore ordinary dresses, most of which exhibited considerable deterioration even before wartime circumstances commenced. Not one prisoner had received appropriate winter garments throughout their transit to this isolated compound situated within the Bavarian rural landscape. Among those imprisoned was Ingrid Müller, a 28-year-old former battlefield nurse who grasped a threadbare wool covering around her frame as she examined her unfamiliar surroundings with apprehensive eyes. This covering had been presented to her by her maternal parent before departing for military service, and presently it symbolized among her remaining tangible connections to familial origins and happier times. Standing beside her was Maria Fischer, scarcely 19 years of age, who had functioned as a telegraph communications operator until American military units overwhelmed her operational position during their advance. Maria's dress appeared more appropriate for pleasant summer gatherings than surviving a brutal German winter season, and she had already manifested a relentless cough throughout her journey to the confinement facility that showed no signs of improvement. The American military personnel supervising these captives found themselves equally distant from their homeland, grappling with the intricate challenges of administering a facility for which they had received absolutely no specialized training or preparation. Sergeant Michael O'Connor, originating from Boston, had volunteered for military service immediately following the Pearl Harbor attack and had engaged in continuous combat operations across European territories from Normandy beaches to this frozen German territory. He had witnessed sufficient warfare to satisfy multiple lifetimes' worth of experience, yet nothing within his military preparation had equipped him for the responsibility of overseeing female prisoners of war, particularly as winter intensified its merciless grip upon the surrounding region and its vulnerable inhabitants. Private Tommy Williams, a young man raised on agricultural land in Iowa, had enlisted in armed forces on his 18th birthday, motivated by newspaper accounts of German atrocities that had dominated American publications for several years. He had anticipated encountering monstrous adversaries when confronting German captives. Instead, he discovered himself observing women who evoked memories of his own sibling back home, women who appeared equally cold, undernourished, and terrified as he frequently felt throughout his service. Initial exchanges between military guards and prisoners were characterized by reciprocal distrust and deliberate emotional separation. The German females had been cautioned by their own propaganda machinery that American soldiers represented barbaric occupying forces who demonstrated zero compassion toward captives. They anticipated severe treatment, insufficient nourishment, and potentially worse circumstances. Their experiences during transportation had accomplished little to challenge these apprehensions, as overwhelmed American supply chains had struggled to furnish even fundamental necessities for the massive quantities of prisoners being detained as German military resistance disintegrated rapidly. For their component, the American soldiers had undergone repeated briefings regarding the dangers of developing excessive familiarity with enemy captives across all circumstances. Military regulations demanded professional detachment, and many soldiers harbored legitimate anger toward any German personnel after witnessing the devastation and human suffering inflicted by years of brutal warfare. Some had mourned close companions in battles against German forces, and forgiveness did not materialize easily during the harsh winter of 1944. Nevertheless, the physical circumstances of the camp rendered complete emotional distance nearly impossible to maintain. The barracks suffered from overcrowding, with women resting on thin straw mattresses that furnished minimal protection from the wooden flooring beneath. Small children accompanied certain prisoners, introducing another dimension of complexity to an already challenging situation. These youngsters had perpetrated no offenses beyond being born into wartime Germany, yet they shivered in identical inadequate clothing as their mothers. As December advanced and temperatures persistently declined, the humanitarian catastrophe became impossible to disregard. The approaching winter season promised to become one of the most severe in recent historical memory, and the camp's heating mechanisms were woefully insufficient for the population housed within its boundaries. What had appeared manageable during relatively temperate autumn months was rapidly transforming into a question of survival versus death. The evening of December 18th introduced a meteorological system that weather scientists would subsequently characterize as unprecedented in its ferocity. Temperatures descended to 20 degrees below zero Fahrenheit, and screaming winds propelled snow through every opening in the camp's hastily erected buildings. The inadequate heating apparatus, already laboring to warm the overcrowded barracks, began failing completely as coal provisions diminished to dangerously low levels. What had been uncomfortable living circumstances transformed instantaneously into a legitimate survival emergency. Inside Barrack 7, Ingrid Miller encircled her arms around 6-year-old Klaus, whose maternal parent had perished during an Allied aerial bombardment 3 weeks before capture. The boy had emotionally attached himself to Ingrid, and she had assumed the position of his guardian despite possessing no legal responsibility to do so. Klaus's thin jacket, dimensioned for a considerably smaller child, left his arms vulnerable to the bitter cold. His lips had acquired a bluish coloration that Ingrid recognized from her nursing background as an early indication of hypothermia. Maria Fischer huddled in the corner with 3 other young women, all sharing a solitary blanket that furnished little defense against the wind that screamed through gaps in the wooden barriers. The persistent cough she had manifested during transport had worsened substantially, and she struggled to capture her breath between episodes of violent shivering. Her summer dress, already inadequate for normal winter circumstances, offered virtually zero protection against the Arctic conditions that had descended upon the camp. Throughout the barracks, comparable scenes unfolded as mothers attempted to shield their children with their own bodies. Elderly women doubled over in agony from the cold, and younger prisoners shared whatever meager clothing they possessed. The sound of chattering teeth created a constant background rhythm punctuated by the cries of infants who could not comprehend why they felt so uncomfortable and cold. Outside, Sergeant O'Connor executed his mandatory rounds, observing the frost that materialized on his breath before it could dissipate in the wind. His regulation winter coat, lined with wool and engineered specifically for these conditions, maintained him reasonably warm despite the brutal temperatures. As he passed each barrack, he could hear the sounds of distress from within, and the contrast between his own comfort and the suffering of the prisoners became increasingly difficult to reconcile with his conscience and sense of humanity toward fellow human beings, regardless of their nationality or circumstances. Private Williams accompanied the sergeant on his rounds, his own winter gear providing adequate protection against the elements. As they approached Barrack 7, they heard a sound that stopped both men in their tracks completely. It was Klaus crying not just from cold, but from genuine fear. his young voice calling out for his mother in broken German phrases that needed no translation to convey their meaning and desperate emotion. Through a crack in the wooden door, Williams caught a glimpse of Ingrid attempting to warm the boy with her breath while wrapping him in her thin shawl desperately. The futility of her efforts was obvious, even from a distance, as the child continued suffering. At 12:47 in the morning, Sergeant O'Connor made a decision that would violate every regulation in the Army Handbook on prisoner management protocols. Standing outside Barrack 7, listening to Klaus's increasingly weak cries, he began unfastening his regulation winter coat deliberately. The heavy wool garment, issued specifically for European winter combat, represented the difference between life and death in these conditions. Without it, O'Connor would face the same hypothermia risk as the prisoners he was supposed to guard. Private Williams observed in stunned silence as his sergeant removed the coat entirely, revealing only the standard olive drab uniform underneath, exposing himself to the same brutal elements that threatened the prisoners' lives. Maintaining absolute silence, O'Connor moved deliberately toward Ingrid and the trembling youngster positioned beside her. Klaus gazed upward with eyes that appeared excessively aged for his 6 years of existence, eyes that had already witnessed greater suffering than most individuals encounter throughout entire lifetimes of experience. The sergeant descended to a kneeling position and tenderly enveloped his winter garment around both Ingrid and Klaus simultaneously, guaranteeing that the youngster was entirely enclosed within the heated wool interior that still preserved O'Connor's body warmth from moments earlier. The transformation was instantaneous and remarkable in its effectiveness. Klaus's violent trembling commenced subsiding within mere minutes of receiving warmth, and his respiratory patterns became increasingly regular as his diminutive frame initiated warming processes. Ingrid experienced tears materializing in her eyes, originating not from frigid temperatures, but from an unexpected emotion she had never anticipated feeling toward an American military person. The compassionate nature of this gesture proved so unanticipated, so fundamentally contradictory to everything she had been instructed regarding her captors, that it profoundly challenged her comprehension of the entire situation and forced her to reconsider every assumption she had held about these foreign soldiers who now guarded her daily existence. Additional women throughout the barrack observed this scene developing with profound amazement and complete disbelief at what their own eyes were witnessing. Maria Fisher, still experiencing coughing episodes from her corner location, stared in absolute shock as the adversary soldier relinquished his own protection to assist a German youngster without hesitation or apparent reservation. The propaganda material they had been systematically fed regarding American savagery seemed utterly impossible to reconcile with the tangible reality of what they were currently witnessing with their own vision. This individual, who possessed the option to remain heated and secure outside the barracks, had deliberately exposed himself to potentially lethal cold temperatures to assist someone he had received extensive training to perceive as an adversary deserving no sympathy or consideration whatsoever. Williams, still positioned in the entrance area, comprehended that his sergeant's action had established an expectation that could not be disregarded without moral consequence. Additional youngsters in the barrack were gazing at him with identical desperate hope that Klaus had displayed, and the private discovered himself confronting the identical moral choice that had motivated O'Connor's decision moments earlier without any guarantee of safety or approval from superior officers who might view such actions as violations of military protocol, deserving punishment. His personal winter garment, marginally smaller but equally heated, symbolized his defense against the merciless night that still possessed numerous hours remaining before dawn would arrive. The instant of determination materialized when Williams observed a woman in the distant corner grasping an infant who had ceased crying completely in an ominous silence. From his experience assisting with agricultural animals back in Iowa during harsh winters, he comprehended that silence from an infant in distress frequently signaled a dangerous medical condition requiring immediate intervention. The infant's motionlessness was not tranquil slumber, but rather the dangerous lethargy that accompanied severe hypothermia in extremely young individuals whose bodies could no longer generate sufficient heat. Williams extracted his coat without hesitation or second thought, traversing the barrack to reach the woman cradling the baby in her arms. She gazed upward at him with eyes saturated with desperation and gratitude simultaneously, Comprehending his intention even before he enveloped the heated garment around her frame and the infant she protected, the coat's residual body warmth immediately commenced reversing the infant's dangerous condition through direct thermal transfer, and within several minutes the youngster began displaying indications of renewed alertness and responsiveness to external stimuli that indicated recovery from life-threatening hypothermia. The two American military personnel presently stood within the freezing barrack structure, attired only in their standard uniforms without protective outerwear, vulnerable to identical life-threatening circumstances as the captives they were officially supposed to guard according to military regulations. Their sacrifice was observed by more than 30 German women and youngsters, all of whom had been systematically conditioned through propaganda to anticipate cruelty and brutality from their captors rather than kindness. Instead, they were experiencing something that fundamentally challenged every assumption they had maintained regarding the nature of their adversaries and forced them to reconsider whether everything they had been taught about Americans was deliberately false propaganda designed to maintain hatred between populations. Information regarding what was transpiring in Barrack 7 commenced, spreading quietly throughout the compound as additional guards completed their scheduled rounds and encountered O'Connor and Williams inside prisoner accommodations in violation of standard procedures. The vision of two American soldiers experiencing identical dangerous circumstances as their charges generated a ripple of confusion and intense debate among remaining guard personnel throughout the facility who struggled to reconcile regulations with humanitarian instincts. Several individuals perceived the action as dangerously naive and potentially treasonous behavior deserving official punishment, while others discovered themselves questioning their personal commitment to strict protocol enforcement when confronted with suffering children who reminded them of family members. Corporal Jake Morrison from Detroit had been formulating plans to report the unauthorized entrance into prisoner quarters when he initially discovered the situation during his routine inspection. However, observing Klaus sleeping peacefully in O'Connor's coat and witnessing the grateful tears streaming down German mothers' faces transformed his perspective entirely and fundamentally altered his understanding of appropriate responses to humanitarian emergencies that transcended military protocol considerations. Morrison commenced considering his personal winter equipment and the vulnerable youngsters in additional barracks who were confronting identical life-threatening circumstances without any protection from the killing cold. The night remained far from concluded, and atmospheric temperatures displayed zero indications of improving before dawn would arrive hours later. The determination made by O'Connor and Williams had preserved immediate lives through direct intervention, but it had simultaneously established a precedent that would test the moral courage of every American soldier stationed throughout the compound and force each individual to make personal choices between following regulations or saving lives. Within 30 minutes following O'Connor and Williams entering Barrack 7, the narrative of their sacrifice had disseminated through the guard rotation like wildfire spreading through dry timber. Corporal Morrison discovered himself incapable of completing his rounds without pausing at Barrack 12, where he could perceive the distressed cries of additional youngsters reverberating through the thin barriers separating living spaces. Inside, he encountered mothers desperately attempting to shield their young ones from the killing cold temperatures, utilizing nothing except summer garments and threadbare coverings that provided virtually no insulation against sub-freezing temperatures. What Morrison witnessed transformed him instantaneously and permanently altered his perspective on appropriate treatment of prisoners. A young German maternal figure was exhaling heated air onto her toddler's hands in a futile attempt to prevent frostbite from permanently damaging delicate tissues. The youngster's fingers had already acquired the waxy, pale appearance that Morrison recognized as early stages of serious cold injury, requiring immediate medical intervention to prevent permanent damage or tissue death. Without conscious deliberation, Morrison commenced removing his personal winter coat, his hands moving more rapidly than his mind could process the serious implications of violating explicit orders from superior officers who expected absolute compliance with prisoner management protocols. The German women in Barrack 12 reacted with stunned disbelief at witnessing another unexpected act of kindness from their supposed enemies. They had invested months being instructed that American soldiers were monsters who delighted in German suffering and showed no mercy to defeated adversaries. Yet here was another adversary soldier deliberately exposing himself to mortal danger to protect German youngsters who represented the next generation of their defeated enemy nation. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming and psychologically destabilizing, forcing these women to confront the genuine possibility that everything they had believed regarding their captors might be fundamentally incorrect propaganda designed to maintain hatred and prevent any human connection between opposing populations during wartime. Private First Class. Robert Chen discovered himself positioned outside Barrack 15, wrestling with his personal moral crisis regarding appropriate responses to human suffering. Chen had volunteered for military service partially to demonstrate his American loyalty and overcome discrimination, and following regulations had consistently been his path to acceptance and advancement. Yet the sounds emerging from the barrack made regulation compliance seem not merely incorrect, but genuinely evil in its indifference to preventable human suffering occurring within his jurisdiction and moral responsibility. Inside, Chen discovered Greta Hoffman, a 45-year-old former hospital administrator with extensive medical knowledge, attempting to care for 8 youngsters whose mothers had been separated during administrative processing procedures. Greta had managed to gather all the youngsters into a compact group, utilizing her personal body and thin scarves to establish a makeshift shelter against the penetrating cold. Her lips displayed blue discoloration from extreme cold exposure, and her movements had become sluggish, in a manner that Chen recognized as dangerous hypothermia symptoms requiring immediate intervention to prevent organ failure. The vision of Greta sacrificing her personal well-being to protect youngsters who were not even her biological offspring broke through Chen's careful adherence to military protocol and forced him to prioritize human compassion over regulation compliance. He extracted his winter coat and assisted Greta in wrapping the youngsters in its warmth, observing as their violent shivering commenced, subsiding within minutes of receiving adequate thermal protection. Greta gazed upward at Chen with an expression of profound gratitude that transcended language barriers entirely and communicated appreciation that words could never adequately express regardless of linguistic capabilities as additional American soldiers made comparable choices. Throughout the remaining night hours, the dynamic within the compound underwent a fundamental transformation that would permanently alter relationships between guards and prisoners. German women who had invested weeks avoiding visual contact with their guards suddenly discovered themselves receiving life-saving warmth provided by those identical guards who now appeared less like enemies and more like fellow human beings responding to universal suffering. The artificial barriers established by warfare, propaganda, and military hierarchy commenced crumbling under the substantial weight of shared humanity and recognition of common values that transcended national identities. The response from the German female prisoners proved as unexpected as the soldiers' actions had been initially. Instead of perceiving the American sacrifices as weakness to be exploited for potential escape or advantage, the women commenced organizing themselves to guarantee that the borrowed coats furnished maximum benefit to those most vulnerable. Ingrid, with her nursing background and medical training, assumed charge of monitoring the most vulnerable youngsters and rotating the heated coats to prevent anyone from succumbing to hypothermia, while ensuring equitable distribution of limited resources. Maria Fischer, despite her personal persistent cough and obvious discomfort, commenced teaching other women breathing exercises that could assist generating body heat through controlled respiration techniques she had learned during her service. The irony that former adversaries were presently collaborating for mutual survival was not lost on anyone involved in these unprecedented interactions. The most profound transformation occurred in the youngsters themselves, who began viewing American soldiers differently. Klaus, heated and secure in Sergeant O'Connor's coat that still carried his scent, commenced speaking to the American soldier in the limited English vocabulary he had acquired through observation. His innocent attempts at communication generated moments of genuine connection that transcended the artificial divisions of wartime conflict. Additional youngsters followed Klaus's example, tentatively approaching American soldiers who had shared their warmth without expecting anything in return, except perhaps basic gratitude and acknowledgement of their sacrifice. Information regarding the night's events reached Lieutenant Colonel James Patterson, who confronted an unprecedented crisis of military discipline requiring careful navigation. His soldiers had violated explicit orders and potentially compromised their personal safety through unauthorized actions. According to military law and regulations, Patterson should have ordered court-martial proceedings against every soldier who violated prisoner management protocols. Yet Patterson also comprehended that his soldiers had prevented multiple deaths through their humanitarian actions in that forcing hypothermic youngsters to return life-saving coats would essentially constitute murder through deliberate indifference to preventable suffering. By dawn on December 19th, information regarding the American soldiers' unprecedented actions had reached every corner of the compound, generating ripple effects that extended far beyond the immediate crisis of the brutal winter night that had tested everyone's humanity. The surviving German female prisoners discovered themselves fundamentally reassessing everything they had believed regarding their captors and questioning whether propaganda had deliberately misrepresented American values, while the American soldiers discovered that their individual acts of conscience had collectively transformed the entire atmosphere of the facility in ways that improved both security and humanitarian conditions simultaneously. The legacy of that frozen December night extended beyond specific individuals who experienced it to influence contemporary discussions regarding humanitarian treatment during conflict, prisoner rights, and genuine possibilities for reconciliation between opposing groups who discovered shared humanity, transcended artificial divisions created by warfare. The determination of several American soldiers to share their winter coats with German female prisoners preserved lives in the immediate moment, but simultaneously planted seeds of understanding that continued flourishing long after the final shot of World War II had been fired into history books, documenting humanity's capacity for both cruelty and extraordinary compassion during its darkest hours.